The crimson nebula stretched across the viewport, like a bloodstain on the void. Captain Vex stood on the bridge of the obsidian talon, his scaled fingers tapping impatiently against the command console. 3 weeks of patrol in this forsaken sector had yielded nothing but dust and cosmic radiation. The Cath Empire demanded results, and Vex's crew was growing restless. "Status report," he commanded, his dual-toned voice echoing across the dimly lit bridge. First Officer Drax straightened at the tactical station, yellow eyes narrowing as he consulted the holographic display. "All systems nominal, Captain. Still no significant contacts in this quadrant." Vex's tail twitched in annoyance. This ghost freighter, the Intelligence Division reported, had better materialize soon. The High Council doesn't look kindly on wasted resources. Perhaps the rumors were just that. Rumors, suggested Lieutenant Kira from Communications, her slender form hunched over her console. These outlying sectors are rife with smuggler tales designed to... "Contact!" The shout came from Ensign Jor at the science station. "Faint distress beacon, bearing 7-3 Mark II. Vex's head snapped toward the view screen. "Magnification." The screen remained dark, showing only distant stars and the edge of the nebula. The distress signal was too distant for visual confirmation. "Signal analysis," Vex ordered, striding to the central command podium. Lieutenant Kira's claws danced across her console. "It's weak, Captain. Primitive frequency modulation. Repeating pattern. Definitely not Cath in origin." "Can you translate?" "Working on it. The syntax patterns are unusual. It resembles some old human dialects we've encountered before, but much more primitive." Vex's lip curled into what passed for a smile among the Cath, a predatory expression that revealed rows of serrated teeth. "Humans, soft creatures, excellent slaves. How far?" "Approximately 3 light hours, sir," Ensign Jor replied, adjusting sensor parameters. "Signal suggests a small to medium-sized vessel, possibly a freighter." First Officer Drax stepped closer to Vex, speaking in a lowered voice. "Captain, something feels manufactured about this. The distress pattern is too regular, too artificial." "Your caution is noted, First Officer," Vex said dismissively. "But a human freighter in this sector is too valuable to ignore. Set intercept course, full sublight, prepare boarding parties." "Yes, Captain," Drax replied, though his hesitation was evident. As the obsidian talon altered course, Vex settled into his command chair. The thrill of the hunt stirred in his blood. One more raid, one more victory for the glory of the Cath Empire. His last 3 raids had earned him commendations from the High Council. This one would be no different. What Vex couldn't know was that this hunt would change everything. The bridge fell into a focused quiet as the obsidian talon accelerated toward the distress signal. Lieutenant Kira worked diligently at her station, parsing the strange broadcast pattern. "Captain, I've managed to decode portions of the message," she announced after several minutes. "It's definitely human in origin. They're reporting engine failure and life support degradation, requesting immediate assistance." "Vulnerable and desperate," Vex said, satisfaction coloring his tone. "Perfect." Ensign Jor cleared his throat nervously. "Captain, I'm detecting some unusual energy fluctuations near what appears to be their engine section. The readings don't match any known human propulsion system in our database." "Explain," Vex demanded. "I can't, sir. It's almost as if..." The science officer's voice trailed off as he adjusted his instruments. "Perhaps sensor interference from the nebula." Drax moved to the science station, examining the readings himself. "Those patterns are too regular for natural interference." He turned to Vex. "Captain, I recommend we approach with caution and scan more thoroughly before committing to boarding operations." Vex waved a dismissive hand. "Your excessive caution borders on cowardice. First Officer, It's a human vessel sending a distress call. Their technology is generations behind ours. With respect, Captain, Drax persisted. If it's so primitive, why isn't it fleeing? Our approach vector should be visible to even basic human sensors by now. The question hung in the air, and for a brief moment, doubt flickered across Vex's reptilian features. Perhaps their systems are truly disabled, he countered. Or perhaps they know resistance against a Kth warship is futile. He straightened in his chair. Continue approach. Battle stations. I want shields at maximum, and weapons on standby. A standard precaution only. As the crew complied, Vex studied the tactical display. The human vessel remained motionless, broadcasting its plea for help into the void. Something in the captain's instinct whispered caution, but he silenced it. The glory of the hunt outweighed the shadow of doubt. The hours passed with excruciating slowness as the obsidian talon closed the distance to its prey. The bridge crew maintained a tense vigilance, each member attending to their stations with practiced efficiency. We're approaching optimal sensor range, Ensign Jor announced. Conducting deep scan now. The holographic display at the center of the bridge illuminated with the target vessel's silhouette, an elongated hull with what appeared to be primitive cargo modules attached. Its exterior showed scorch marks and hull breaches consistent with a vessel in distress. Hull configuration matches no known registry, Jor reported, frowning at his readings. It appears to be a custom-modified transport, possibly assembled from salvaged components. Those markings, Lieutenant Kira observed, pointing to faded symbols on the vessel's hull. They're human trait identifiers, but at least a century out of date. Vex leaned forward, studying the image. Interesting. Survivors from a lost colony, perhaps, or smugglers using outdated identifiers to avoid detection. He turned to his tactical officer. Weapon status? All systems armed and ready, Captain, replied the weapons officer. Boarding parties standing by in launch bays 1 through 3. First Officer Drax stepped closer to the command podium. Captain, something still doesn't feel right. The vessel's trajectory hasn't altered since we detected it. No evasive maneuvers. No attempt to accelerate away. Even a damaged human ship would show some reaction to our approach. Vex's tail twitched with irritation. Your concerns are noted, First Officer. But consider the possibility that we've found something truly valuable. Perhaps human colonists who've been isolated for generations, unaware of the current galactic situation. Such a find would be worth far more than mere cargo. Before Drax could respond, Lieutenant Kira called out from her station. Captain, I'm receiving a new transmission from the vessel. Audio only. Let's hear it, Vex ordered. A crackling voice filled the bridge. A human voice, calm and measured despite the static interference. Unidentified vessel approaching our position. This is the freighter Hermes requesting assistance. Our engines are offline, and our life support is failing. We have valuable cargo and can offer compensation for rescue. They see us, murmured Drax. Yet, they're not panicking. No human vessel has ever reacted this calmly to a Quoth warship. Vex's eyes narrowed. Perhaps they don't recognize what we are. Respond, Lieutenant. Tell them we're approaching to render assistance. Kira nodded and opened a channel. Human vessel. This is the Kayath ship Obsidian Talon. We are approaching your position to render assistance. Stand by for boarding operations. There was a pause before the human vessel responded. Acknowledged. Obsidian Talon. We're standing by. Please hurry. Our atmospheric systems are failing. The transmission ended abruptly. Too easy, Drax muttered. You worry too much. First Officer, Vex said, rising from his command chair. Prepare to launch boarding shuttles once we're within optimal range. I want this vessel secured with minimal damage. Its occupants will fetch a fine price in the slave markets, and I'm curious about what valuable cargo they might be transporting. As the Obsidian Talon closed to within 1 light hour of the target, The bridge crew continued monitoring the mysterious vessel. Sensor data streamed in, painting an increasingly detailed picture of their quarry. "Final approach vector calculated," reported the navigation officer. "Matching velocity in 3 minutes." Vex nodded in satisfaction. "Excellent. Boarding teams, stand ready. Remember, we want the humans alive and the cargo intact." "Captain," Ensign Jor called out, his voice tense. "I'm detecting power fluctuations throughout the human vessel. Their energy signature is changing." "Explain," Vex demanded. "I can't, sir. It's as if—" Jor's explanation was cut short as the main view screen flickered. The image of the battered freighter wavered like a mirage in the desert. Before the stunned eyes of the Keith crew, the vessel's hull plates began to shift, retracting to reveal sleek, matte black surfaces beneath. Hidden weapon ports slid open along its length, and sensor arrays unfolded like blooming flowers of death. "What in the void?" Vex growled, his confidence evaporating as the wounded freighter transformed before them. The holographic designation on the tactical display changed from unknown vessel to Era's MK7, as the ship's true identity registered in the KTA sensors. "It's a trap!" Drax shouted, lunging for the tactical station. "Battle stations, raise shields to maximum!" Before Vex could issue orders, a new transmission came through, crystal clear this time, without the artificial static of the earlier communication. "Koth vessel Obsidian Talon," came a calm, almost conversational human voice. "This is Captain Blake of the United Earth Forces Warship Ares. I regret the deception, but we needed to assess your intentions. As you've confirmed hostile intent through your preparation of boarding parties, I must inform you that you are now considered a threat to human interests in this sector." Vex snarled, his composure cracking. "Open fire, all batteries!" "Weapons locked, sir," the tactical officer reported, frantically working his console. "Their targeting systems are faster than—" A blinding flash erupted from the Ares, but no explosion followed. Instead, an invisible wave of force washed over the Obsidian Talon. Every light on the bridge dimmed momentarily before returning to normal. "Status report!" Vex roared. "FTL drive offline," reported the engineering officer, panic evident in his voice. "Just gone offline. No damage, no explosion. It's as if someone threw a switch." "Gravitational distortion pulse," Ensign Jor said, his voice barely above a whisper as he stared at his readings. "They've somehow generated a localized gravity well that's disrupted our drive harmonics." "Impossible," Vex hissed. "No species has mastered gravitational weaponry." Captain Blake's voice returned, still unnervingly calm. "That was a demonstration of our Type 1 gravitic disruptor. As you can see, your faster-than-light capabilities have been temporarily suspended. This is not an act of war, but a request for diplomatic engagement." "They're targeting our weapon systems," shouted the tactical officer. Streaks of blue-white energy lanced from the human warship, threading through the Keith vessel's shields as if they weren't there. No explosions followed, no hull breaches appeared, but one by one, the Obsidian Talon's weapon systems went dark on the status display. "Phase-shifted rail cannons," Ensign Jor explained, his voice filled with awe and terror. "They're firing projectiles that briefly exist out of phase with normal space-time. Our shields can't intercept what isn't fully in our reality until impact." Vex's mind reeled. The technology the humans were displaying was centuries beyond what intelligence reports had indicated. How had they concealed such advancements? "Captain," Lieutenant Kira called out, her voice strained. "Our communications array has been disabled. Pinpoint strikes from— I'm not sure what. The system diagnostics showed dozens of microscopic hull penetrations around the main transmitter assembly." "Stealth drones," Drax said grimly. "They must have deployed them while we were distracted by the gravitic pulse." Vex's claws dug into the armrests of his command chair. In less than 2 minutes, his warship had been effectively neutered, unable to flee, fight, or call for help. Yet the humans had inflicted no casualties, caused no catastrophic damage. It was a display of power so precise, so controlled, that it terrified him more than any destructive assault could have. "Captain Blake is hailing us again," Lieutenant Kira reported. "Local comms only." "Put it through," Vex ordered, his voice hoarse. "Captain Vex." Blake's voice was almost friendly. "I want to be clear. We could have destroyed your vessel at any time during this encounter. Instead, we've chosen to disable your offensive capabilities while leaving life support, internal communications, and sublight engines intact. This is not an act of mercy, but a demonstration. Humanity wishes the K-8 Empire to understand exactly what it faces if it continues its expansion into our sectors." Vex's fury boiled over. "Navigation! Set collision course! Full sublight engines!" "Sir," the navigation officer's voice quavered. "You heard me. If we can't shoot them, we'll ram them." The Obsidian Talon's engines flared to life, driving the warship toward the human vessel. It was a desperate move, born of rage and wounded pride, but it was all Vex had left. The Ares Mk7 simply moved. With a grace that seemed impossible for a vessel its size, it slid sideways in space, letting the K-8 warship hurtle past. No emergency maneuvers, no frantic evasion, just calm, precise movement that spoke of absolute technological superiority. "Their maneuvering thrusters shouldn't allow for that level of agility," Ensign Jor muttered, still monitoring his sensors. "They must have some form of inertial control we've never encountered." As the Obsidian Talon turned for another attempt, the space around them shimmered. Where empty void had been moments before, 10 sleek human vessels now appeared, surrounding the K-8 warship in a perfect sphere formation. "Holographic stealth technology," Drax breathed. "They were never alone." Captain Blake's voice returned, still maddeningly composed. "Captain Vex, these are the UEF vessels Thermopylae, Agincourt, Hastings, Normandy, Waterloo, Gettysburg, Marathon, Alamo, Stalingrad, and Gallipoli. Each is armed identically to the Ares, and each has been targeting your vessel since before you detected our distress signal. This will be my final attempt at peaceful communication. You have 3 options. First, you may agree to withdraw all KTH forces from human claim sectors immediately. Second, you may agree to open diplomatic channels to negotiate border agreements. Or third, you may continue hostilities, in which case your vessel and crew will be eliminated, and the K-8 Empire will learn of your fate only when your absence becomes conspicuous." The bridge fell silent. Even Vex, with all his pride and battle fury, could recognize an unwinnable scenario. The humans had orchestrated a perfect trap, and the Obsidian Talon had sailed directly into it. "Your demonstration has been noted," Vex finally responded, every word tasting of bile in his mouth. "I will convey your message to the High Council." "A wise decision," Blake replied. "We will restore minimal power to your FTL drive, sufficient for a single jump back to KTH space. Consider this gesture a down payment on future diplomatic relations." As if on cue, the engineering officer reported, "Captain, FTL systems are coming back online. Limited functionality, but enough for a return jump to the nearest KTH outpost." Vex glared at the view screen, at the human ships that had so completely outmatched his proud warship. "This isn't over, human." "No," Blake agreed. "It's just beginning. Return home. Captain Vex, tell your leaders what you saw today. Tell them that humans prefer peace, but have prepared for war on a scale the K-8 cannot comprehend. The choice of what happens next belongs to the K-8 Empire." The transmission ended, and the human vessels began to withdraw, maintaining their weapons lock on the Obsidian Talon until they were at a safe distance. "Plot a course for Outpost Vega 9, Vex ordered, his voice hollow with defeat. "Maximum speed." As the stars stretched into lines of light around them, Vex remained on the bridge, staring into the void. For the first time in his long career, he had encountered a force that made the mighty Kaith Empire seem like children playing with sticks against a storm. The humans had not only defeated him, they had humiliated him with their restraint, and somewhere deep in his core, beyond the wounded pride and rage, a cold fear had taken root, the fear that the age of Quoth dominance might be coming to an end. The journey back to Kaithia space was conducted in near silence. The crew of the Obsidian Talon moved through their duties like automata, the shock of their encounter with the human warships still fresh. Emergency repairs were made where possible, but many of the sophisticated systems affected by the human weapons remained stubbornly offline, defying the best efforts of the engineering teams. In his private quarters, Captain Vex nursed both his wounded pride and a physical injury, a deep gash across his forearm where a piece of shrapnel had caught him during the humans' precision strike on the communications array. The wound throbbed, a constant reminder of his failure. A chime at his door preceded First Officer Drax's entrance. The tactical officer stood rigidly at attention, awaiting acknowledgement. "Speak," Vex said flatly, not bothering to rise from his seated position. "We'll reach Outpost Vega 9 within the hour." "Captain," Drax reported, "I've prepared a preliminary report on the encounter for transmission to the High Council." "Let me see it," Vex demanded, extending his uninjured arm. Drax handed over a datapad, and Vex scrolled through the document, his expression darkening with each passage. "This reads like defeatism," he growled. "You make it sound as if the humans are unstoppable." Drax's posture remained rigid. "I've reported exactly what we observed, Captain. The humans displayed technology far beyond our current capabilities. Their weapons penetrated our shields as if they weren't there. They disabled our systems with surgical precision. They revealed a cloaked fleet that our sensors never detected. These are facts, not opinions." Vex hurled the datapad across the room. "Facts that will see us both executed for cowardice if presented this way. The High Council doesn't tolerate failure." "With respect, Captain," Drax said, his voice level. "The High Council must understand the true nature of the threat. If we downplay the humans' capabilities to save our scales, we risk encouraging a full-scale conflict that could devastate the Empire." Vex rose from his seat, towering over his first officer. "And if we report that 11 human ships completely neutralized a Kaith battlecruiser without firing a single truly destructive shot, we'll be laughed out of the council chamber before being executed for incompetence." "Then what do you suggest, Captain, that we lie?" Vex turned away, moving to the viewport where stars streaked by in lines of light. "No, not lie. But we must frame this encounter carefully. The humans didn't defeat us. They revealed their hand too early. They showed us their technology, their tactics, knowledge we can use." "To what end?" Drax asked. "Even if we develop countermeasures against what we witnessed today, who knows what other technologies they've developed? This was a demonstration, Captain. They wanted us to see those weapons." "Which means there are others they kept hidden," Vex concluded, his voice dropping. "Yes, I've considered that possibility." For a long moment, silence hung between them. Then Vex turned back to face his first officer. "We'll report the facts, but we'll emphasize the strategic value of what we've learned. We'll present this not as a defeat, but as a crucial intelligence-gathering mission." His eyes narrowed. "And we'll recommend caution in future engagements with human forces, not out of fear, but out of tactical prudence." Drax nodded slowly. "A reasonable approach, Captain. Though I suspect the High Council will still question how we allowed ourselves to be lured into such a trap." "Let them question," Vex said grimly. "Better to face their displeasure than to lead the Empire into a war it cannot win." He gestured toward the discarded datapad. "Revise the report along those lines. I want it ready before we dock." As Drax retrieved the pad and turned to leave, Vex spoke again. "First Officer." "Yes, Captain?" Your warning about the trap? You were right. I should have heeded your caution. Drax's expression remained neutral, but his voice softened slightly. Next time, perhaps. After his first officer departed, Vex returned to the viewport, his reflection ghostly against the backdrop of streaking stars. The face that looked back at him seemed older somehow, the scales around his eyes more pronounced. One encounter, barely 15 minutes of actual confrontation, and everything had changed. The humans hadn't just demonstrated superior technology. They'd shown a profound understanding of Kaith psychology. They had known exactly how to lure a Kaith warship into their trap, exactly how to neutralize it without destruction, and exactly how to deliver their message for maximum impact. That level of insight was perhaps more terrifying than their weapons. As Outpost Vega 9 appeared on the horizon, a massive structure orbiting a barren moon, Vex steeled himself for what was to come. The next few days would determine not just his fate, but potentially the course of the entire Kaith Empire. 3 weeks after the encounter with the human warships, Captain Vex stood before the High Council of the Kaith Empire, his posture rigid despite the fatigue that weighed on his body and spirit. The council chamber was a vast, domed rotunda, its walls adorned with murals depicting centuries of Kaith conquest. 11 council members sat on the raised dais, their ancient scales gleaming in the light, filtering through stained glass windows that depicted star charts of conquered systems. "Proceed with the holographic replay," commanded High Counselor Thex, the eldest and most feared member of the council. His bifurcated tail curled around his seat, a sign of impatience among the Kaithi. At his order, the center of the chamber illuminated with a 3-dimensional recreation of the encounter between the Obsidian Talon and the human vessels. The recording had been compiled from the Kaith warship's sensor logs, showing in merciless detail how completely they had been outmaneuvered. The council watched in silence as the hologram displayed the transformation of the damaged freighter into the Ares Mk7, the deployment of weapons that bypassed Kaithier shields, and finally, the revelation of the hidden human fleet. When the recording concluded with Captain Blake's ultimatum, a heavy silence filled the chamber. "This recording has been verified?" asked Counselor Zex, her voice thin with age and disbelief. "It has, honored Counselor," Vex confirmed. "Every detail is exactly as we experienced it." "Impossible," spat a younger council member. "No species possesses gravitational weaponry or phase-shifting technology. These recordings must be falsified." First Officer Drax, standing slightly behind Vex, stepped forward. "With respect, honored Council, our ship's memory cores were subjected to the most rigorous authentication protocols upon our return. There is no evidence of tampering or data corruption. What you see is what occurred." High Counselor Thex leaned forward, his ancient eyes fixed on Vex. "You allowed your vessel, one of our most advanced warships, to be lured into an obvious trap. You failed to retreat when presented with anomalous readings. You prepared to attack when diplomatic options remained available. And now you stand before us claiming that humans, possess technology that renders our greatest weapons obsolete." Vex met the Elder's gaze without flinching. "I accept full responsibility for the tactical errors that led to our predicament. But I cannot and will not misrepresent what we encountered. The humans have been developing technologies in secret, far beyond what our intelligence suggested. This was a deliberate demonstration of power, a warning shot across our bow." Murmurs rippled through the council. Another counselor, Mex, spoke up. "If what you say is true, why didn't they simply destroy your vessel? Why this elaborate show of force without final destruction?" "A question I have pondered extensively, honored Counselor," Vex replied. "I believe they wanted us to return, to deliver their message in person, with evidence that could not be dismissed as propaganda or disinformation. They want the Empire to know exactly what we will face if we continue expansion into their territories. Cowardice disguised as mercy, scoffed another council member. No, Drax interjected, then immediately lowered his head. Forgive the interruption, honored council. But having observed the precision of their attacks, I must conclude that their restraint was not born of cowardice, but of strategic calculation. They could have destroyed us at any moment. Instead, they chose to educate us. High Counselor Thex's tail lashed in agitation. And what lesson should the glorious Kath Empire take from this education, First Officer? That we should cower before human technology? That we should abandon our divine right to expand and conquer? Vex stepped forward again. I suggest, honored council, that we should recognize reality. The humans have evolved their technology along different paths than ours. Where we focused on brute force and shield strength, they developed weapons to bypass shields entirely. Where we built ever larger warships, they perfected stealth and deception. He paused, gathering his courage. I recommend that we accept their offer of diplomatic engagement, not out of fear, but out of strategic necessity. We need time to understand their technology, to develop countermeasures. A premature conflict would be unwise. The chamber erupted in hisses and growls, the Kieth equivalent of outraged shouts. High Counselor Thex raised a gnarled hand for silence, which gradually fell across the room. You speak of diplomacy with prey species, Thex said, his voice dripping with contempt. The Kath Empire has never negotiated with lesser beings. We conquer. We dominate. That is our way. With respect, honored counselor, Vex replied. A prey species does not disable a Kathiesh battlecruiser without suffering a single casualty. A prey species does not develop weapons that make our shields irrelevant. The humans have proven themselves, at minimum, to be worthy adversaries. And worthy adversaries can become valuable allies. Counselor Zex raised a bony finger. You suggest alliance now? With creatures we have raided for slaves for generations? I suggest pragmatism, Vex answered. The Empire has always adapted to overcome obstacles. This is merely another adaptation. A younger council member named Kex leaned forward. What if these human weapons are more limited than they appeared? Perhaps they can only be deployed under specific conditions, or require extensive preparation. Perhaps this was their only fleet with such technology, assembled at great cost to create the illusion of widespread superiority. A possibility we cannot discount, Vex acknowledged. But even if true, it would only delay the inevitable. Their technological path is clear, and it directly counters our traditional advantages. Time is not on our side in this equation. High Counselor Thex stared at Vex for a long moment, then turned his gaze to the other council members. Some silent communication seemed to pass between the elders, a weighing of options and consequences. Finally, Thex spoke again. The council will deliberate in private. Captain Vex, First Officer Drax, you are dismissed. Remain available for further questioning. Vex and Drax bowed in unison, then turned and exited the chamber. In the antechamber outside, away from the council's scrutiny, Drax allowed himself a small sigh of relief. You spoke well, Captain. Better than I expected. Truth has its own power, Vex replied, his voice low. Even when it's painful to hear. Do you think they'll agree to diplomatic engagement? Vex's expression was grim. The older counselors will resist, but the younger ones, they're more pragmatic, less bound by tradition. If enough of them recognize the true threat... His words trailed off as the chamber doors reopened. A council aide approached, his manner deferential. The High Council has reached its decision, and request your presence. Captain Vex, First Officer Drax is to remain here. Exchanging a glance with his first officer, Vex straightened his posture and followed the aide back into the council chamber. The atmosphere seemed different somehow. the oppressive weight of tradition temporarily lifted by the cold wind of reality. High Counselor Thex's expression was unreadable, as Vex took his position in the center of the chamber. "Captain Vex of the Obsidian Talon," Thex began formally. "The High Council has considered your report and the evidence presented. While there are differing opinions regarding your performance during the encounter, the strategic implications cannot be ignored." He paused, and it seemed to cost him physical effort to continue. "Therefore, by majority vote, the Council has decided to pursue limited diplomatic engagement with the Human Federation." Vex maintained his rigid posture, concealing his surprise. "The Council's wisdom is beyond question," he responded, using the traditional formula. "You will lead this diplomatic initiative," Thex continued, his tone making it clear this was as much punishment as assignment. "You will assemble a delegation and establish contact with human representatives. You will ascertain the full extent of their technological capabilities, their territorial claims, and their willingness to reach accommodation with the Empire. You will not make binding commitments without Council approval." "I understand, honored Counselor." "Be warned, Captain," Thex added, his voice dropping to a dangerous purr. "If this proves to be a miscalculation, if the humans are merely bluffing, or if their technological advantage is more limited than you believe, the consequences for your career and your life will be severe." Clarity acknowledged. "Honored Counselor," Vex replied, using another formal phrase that indicated acceptance of potential consequences. "The Council expects regular reports. A diplomatic vessel will be prepared for your use. You depart in 3 days." Thex waved a dismissive hand. "You are released from Council presence." Bowing deeply, Vex backed away several steps before turning to exit the chamber. In the antechamber, Drax waited anxiously. "Well?" the first officer prompted. "We're to lead a diplomatic delegation," Vex said, still processing the Council's decision. "It seems your report was persuasive after all." Relief washed over Drax's features. "They chose wisdom over pride. I hadn't dared hope." "Don't celebrate too quickly," Vex cautioned. "Thex made it clear that if we're wrong about the humans' capabilities, we'll pay with our lives. And if we're right, then the Empire faces a fundamental shift in its relationship with the galaxy." Vex began walking toward the exit, Drax falling in step beside him. No longer the unchallenged predator, but one apex species among others. "A difficult transition for many to accept," Drax observed. "Yes, which is why our diplomatic mission is so crucial. We must find a path forward that allows the Empire to maintain its dignity while acknowledging the new reality." Vex's expression hardened. "And we must learn everything we can about human technology. The Council may speak of diplomacy, but they'll never abandon the dream of conquest, merely postpone it." As they stepped into the grand corridor, leading away from the Council chambers, Vex found himself thinking about Captain Blake's words. Humanity wishes the Kaeth Empire to understand exactly what it faces. The human had delivered that message perfectly, and now Vex would deliver a message in return. But what that message would ultimately be, peace or merely a postponement of war, remained to be seen. One standard month later, Vex stood on the bridge of the diplomatic vessel Balanced Discourse, a sleek ship designed for speed and presence rather than combat power. Its hull gleamed with ceremonial markings indicating its protected status under interstellar conventions. Conventions the Kaeth Empire had historically ignored when convenient, but now found suddenly valuable. "We're approaching the designated coordinates," reported the navigation officer. "No sign of human vessels yet." Vex nodded, his eyes fixed on the view screen. The meeting point was a neutral system, uninhabited, and claimed by neither humans nor Kath. A symbolic choice, suggesting equality between powers that the Kathi had never before granted to any species. First Officer Drax, who had insisted on accompanying the diplomatic mission despite being offered a command of his own, stood at Vex's side. "Do you think they'll come?" "They'll come," Vex said with certainty. "They went to extraordinary lengths to arrange this meeting. They want dialogue as much as we do, perhaps more. For different reasons," Drax pointed out. "We seek time to analyze and counter their technology. What do they seek from us?" Before Vex could answer, the sensor officer called out, "Contact! Multiple vessels appearing at bearing 34 Mark 7. The view screen shifted to show empty space, which shimmered briefly before revealing 5 human ships. At their center was the now familiar silhouette of the Ares Mk7. "They were already here," Drax murmured. "Watching us arrive." A communication request chimed on the bridge. Lieutenant Kira, who had also volunteered for the diplomatic mission, announced, "Captain Blake is hailing us, sir." "On screen," Vex ordered, straightening his ceremonial armor. The view screen changed to show a human face, Captain Blake, seated in what appeared to be his command chair. He looked exactly as Vex had imagined from his voice, composed, confident, with eyes that reflected intelligence and determination. "Captain Vex," Blake greeted him with a slight nod. "On behalf of the United Earth Federation, I welcome you to these proceedings. I'm pleased the K-8 Empire has chosen dialogue over confrontation." "Captain Blake," Vex responded, careful to maintain his dignity, while avoiding any hint of aggression. "The K-8 Empire recognizes the value of understanding between powerful civilizations. We come prepared to discuss matters of mutual concern." A slight smile crossed Blake's features. "Well said, Captain. I propose we convene aboard our neutral station facility." The image shifted to show a small space station orbiting a nearby moon, a structure that had not been visible moments before. "It's been specially prepared for these talks, with environments suitable for both our species." Another demonstration, Vex realized. The station had been cloaked just like their ships. Every interaction with the humans seemed designed to remind the K-8 of technological disparities. "Acceptable," Vex agreed. "My delegation will prepare for transfer." "Excellent. Our diplomatic team will meet you there. Blake out." As the communication ended, Drax turned to Vex. "Another hidden facility. They're being rather heavy-handed with these displays. They want to ensure we understand the reality of our situation," Vex replied. "Just as we would do in their position." He turned to address his bridge crew. "Prepare the diplomatic team for shuttle departure. Lieutenant Kira, you'll accompany us as cultural liaison. Dr. Senak will join as medical advisor. First Officer Drax will remain aboard as acting captain." Drax's expression registered surprise. "Captain, I assumed I would be part of the delegation." "I need someone I trust in command of this vessel," Vex explained quietly. "Someone who understands the full implications of our situation and who will make the right decisions if complications arise." Understanding dawned in Drax's eyes. "You're concerned this might be a trap after all?" "I consider it unlikely," Vex admitted. "But prudence is never wasted. If something goes wrong, your orders are to return to KTA space immediately and report to the High Council. No heroics. No rescue attempts." "Understood, Captain," Drax said solemnly. "Though I hope such precautions prove unnecessary." "As do I, First Officer, as do I." 2 hours later, Vex led his small delegation through the airlock of the human station. The atmosphere had been adjusted to a composition comfortable for both species. Slightly more oxygen than Kaith preferred. Slightly less humidity than humans favored. A compromise, symbolic of the larger accommodation they were attempting to reach. Waiting to greet them was a human female in a crisp uniform, adorned with insignia that Vex couldn't interpret. She stepped forward with a diplomatic smile. "Captain Vex, welcome aboard Neutral Ground Station. I'm Dr. Mira Lang, Scientific Advisor to the UEF Diplomatic Corps. Captain Blake sends his apologies. He's been delayed by a communication from Earth, but will join us shortly." Vex inclined his head slightly. Dr. Lang, this is Lieutenant Kira, our communications specialist, and Dr. Senak, our medical advisor. The human doctor turned to Vex's companions with the same practiced smile. Welcome to you both. If you'll follow me, I'll show you to the conference facility. As they walked through the station corridors, Vex noted the meticulous design. Nothing was ostentatiously advanced or threatening, yet subtle details, the silent doors, the perfect climate control, the barely noticeable security systems, all spoke of technological sophistication far beyond Cath standards. Dr. Lang led them into a circular chamber, dominated by a round table. The room's lighting adjusted automatically as they entered, shifting to a spectrum more comfortable for Cath vision. Please, make yourselves comfortable, Lang offered, gesturing to chairs designed to accommodate Cath physiology. Can I offer refreshments while we wait for Captain Blake? Water would be acceptable, Vex replied, noting how the human maintained eye contact, despite the Cath cultural interpretation of such behavior as a challenge. Either she was very brave or very well informed about cross-species etiquette. As a station attendant brought water, Vex settled into his seat, maintaining a dignified posture despite his discomfort with the situation. The Cath Empire had never negotiated as equals with another species before. There were no historical precedents to guide him, no cultural traditions to fall back on. He was, in many ways, writing new chapters in Quoth history, with every word and gesture. Captain Blake arrived a few minutes later, accompanied by two other humans in similar uniforms. He approached the table with confident strides, extending a hand toward Vex before seeming to catch himself. My apologies, Captain, Blake said, withdrawing the hand. I momentarily forgot that handshakes are not part of Cathia greeting customs. Your consideration is noted, Vex replied, impressed despite himself at the human's awareness of Cath cultural norms. Blake introduced his companions, Commander Walsh, his tactical officer, and Ambassador Reyes, a civilian diplomat, before taking his seat across from Vex. I suggest we begin with a clear delineation of territorial boundaries, Blake said, activating a holographic display in the center of the table. A three-dimensional map of the sector appeared, with current Cath and human territories marked in different colors. This represents the current situation. We propose the following adjustments. The map shifted, showing a new boundary line that required the Cath to withdraw from several recently claimed systems. Unacceptable, Vex stated flatly. Those systems were rightfully claimed by Cath explorers, after our colonists were already established on the outer planets. Ambassador Reyes countered smoothly. We have documentation of human mining operations in the Proxima and Tau Ceti systems predating Cath territorial claims by at least 3 standard years. The negotiation continued in this vein for hours, each side presenting claims and counterclaims, proposals and counterproposals. Throughout it all, Vex observed that the humans never resorted to threats or intimidation. They simply presented facts, often supported by evidence that the Cathia couldn't refute. During a brief recess, Dr. Senak approached Vex privately. Captain, I've been observing the humans closely. Their vital signs remain remarkably stable throughout these negotiations. No elevated stress indicators, no signs of deception. Your point, Doctor? They genuinely believe they're negotiating in good faith, Senak explained. They're not bluffing about their territorial claims or their desire for peaceful resolution. Vex considered this information as they returned to the conference table. The afternoon session shifted from territorial matters to trade possibilities and non-aggression protocols. Through it all, Captain Blake remained calm and reasonable, yet firm in his positions, much as he had during their first encounter. As the first day of negotiations drew to a close, Blake suggested a more informal discussion over a meal adapted for both species' dietary requirements. Vex agreed, seeing an opportunity to probe more deeply into human motivations. In the station's dining facility, with fewer aides present, the conversation took a more personal turn. "I'm curious, Captain Blake," Vex said, carefully manipulating the eating utensils provided, "about the development of human military technology. Our intelligence suggested your species was significantly less advanced than what we encountered." Blake smiled slightly. "A deliberate misconception we encouraged. Humanity has learned through bitter experience that appearing weak often invites aggression. Yet you revealed your true capabilities to us. Why?" "Because we judged the time was right," Blake replied, setting down his utensil. "We've been observing K-8 expansion patterns for decades. Your empire was approaching a critical mass of territory that would have made conflict inevitable. We chose to reveal our hand before that point, to demonstrate what war with humanity would cost, before such a war became unavoidable." "A calculated risk," Vex observed. "We might have responded with full military mobilization rather than diplomacy." "We calculated that risk precisely," Dr. Lang interjected. "Our anthropological models of KTH behavior suggested a 73% probability that a demonstration of superior technology, coupled with mercy, would trigger a diplomatic response rather than a suicidal military one." Vex blinked slowly, the Kaith equivalent of raised eyebrows. "You've studied us that thoroughly?" "Of course," Lang replied, matter-of-factly. "Just as I'm sure you've studied us. Knowledge is often the difference between war and peace." "There's something I've been meaning to ask," Vex said after a moment. "Your weapons, the gravitational distortion, the phase-shifted projectiles. How did humans develop such technology when no other species has managed similar breakthroughs?" Blake and Lang exchanged glances before the captain responded. "Necessity and history, primarily. Humanity spent centuries fighting itself before reaching the stars. We developed weapons to use against enemies with identical biology and technology to our own, forcing us to innovate in directions other species never needed to explore. You turned your internal conflicts into advantages," Vex realized. "Precisely," Blake nodded. "While the Kaeth developed weapons to overwhelm less advanced species, we developed weapons to overcome opponents exactly as advanced as ourselves. Different evolutionary pressures, different results." The conversation continued late into the evening, ranging from technological exchange possibilities to cultural understanding initiatives. Throughout it all, Vex found himself reassessing his perceptions of humans. They were not the soft, easily dominated prey species that Kaeth propaganda had portrayed. They were sophisticated, adaptable, and possessed a unique perspective that had led them along technological paths the Kaeth had never considered. As they concluded the day's discussions, Captain Blake walked Vex back toward the airlock, where a shuttle waited to return him to the balanced discourse. "I believe we've made good progress today, Captain Vex," Blake said. "With continued dialogue, I'm confident we can establish a stable, mutually beneficial relationship between our peoples." "Perhaps," Vex allowed. "Those centuries of Kaith expansion cannot be redirected in a single day." "Of course not. But it can begin with a single agreement between two ship captains who chose talking over shooting." Blake's expression grew more serious. "History pivots on such small moments, Captain. Whether we're remembered as the architects of peace or the harbingers of war depends on what we accomplish here." Vex considered the human's words as he prepared to depart. "I will reflect on this, Captain Blake. Until tomorrow." Back aboard the balanced discourse, Vex found First Officer Drax waiting for his report. "How did it proceed?" Drax asked, as they walked toward the captain's quarters. "Better than expected," Vex admitted. "The humans are not what I anticipated." "In what way?" "They're simultaneously more formidable and more reasonable than our intelligence suggested. They seek cooperation, not domination. They want secure borders and trade, not conquest. Drax looked skeptical. "And you believe them?" "I'm beginning to," Vex said, surprising himself with the admission. "Their technology is undeniably superior in key areas, yet they haven't used it to simply destroy us and take what they want. There's a principle at work in their approach, a philosophy that values restraint." "The High Council may not share your appreciation for such philosophies," Drax warned. "I'm aware," Vex sighed, "but my duty is to report what I observe, not what the Council wishes to hear." Later, alone in his quarters, Vex recorded his official report of the day's negotiations. He detailed the territorial proposals, the potential trade agreements, the non-aggression protocols discussed. But he found himself dwelling on less tangible observations. The humans' calm confidence, their thorough understanding of Kaith culture, their willingness to compromise on non-essential matters while remaining firm on core principles. They were, he realized, approaching these negotiations exactly as he would if their positions were reversed. They were extending the minimum concessions necessary to secure peace while maintaining clear military superiority as leverage. It was what any KTA commander would do in their position. Yet somehow, coming from humans, it felt less like manipulation and more like pragmatism. As he concluded his report, Vex found himself adding a personal assessment that would likely anger the High Council. "Based on today's interactions, I must revise my evaluation of human capabilities and intentions. They are not merely technically advanced, but strategically sophisticated. They understand the KTH mind perhaps better than we understand theirs. Most importantly, they appear genuinely committed to avoiding conflict if possible, not out of weakness, but out of a calculated assessment that peace serves their interests better than war. I recommend that the Empire approach these negotiations with the understanding that we are not dealing with a prey species that has temporarily gained an advantage, but with a civilization that has evolved along a different path to reach a level of advancement that may, in some crucial areas, exceed our own. Acknowledging this reality is not surrender. It is the first step toward ensuring the Empire's continued prosperity in a galaxy more complex than we previously understood." Vex ended the recording and transmitted it to Kathith Prime, knowing it might end his career, or worse. But something in his encounter with the humans had shifted his perspective. Perhaps it was witnessing the calm confidence with which Captain Blake had offered peace from a position of strength. Perhaps it was Dr. Lang's matter-of-fact explanation of how they had studied Kaith psychology to avoid unnecessary conflict. Or perhaps it was simply the realization that the galaxy was large enough for multiple apex species, if they were wise enough to recognize each other's strengths and accommodate each other's essential needs. As the diplomatic vessel maintained its position near the neutral station, Vex moved to the viewport and gazed at the stars. Somewhere out there, the High Council would soon be reading his report, deciding the fate of not just his career, but potentially the entire trajectory of the Kathiath Empire. Would they choose the path of adaptation and coexistence, or would pride drive them toward a conflict they couldn't win? The answer would determine whether his first glimpse of a human warship would be remembered as the beginning of a new era of interstellar cooperation, or the opening move in the final chapter of KF dominance. The negotiations continued for 7 more days, each session building on the progress of the previous one. Territorial boundaries were established, trade protocols drafted, cultural exchange initiatives proposed. Through it all, Vex found himself gaining a grudging respect for the human negotiators, especially Captain Blake, whose combination of military discipline and diplomatic flexibility mirrored Vex's own approach. On the final day, as they prepared to sign the preliminary agreement that would be submitted to both their governments for ratification, Blake invited Vex to a private meeting in his quarters aboard the ARS Mk7. The invitation was unprecedented. No Cath had ever been welcomed aboard a human warship before. Against First Officer Drax's cautionary advice, Vex accepted. The interior of the ARES was immaculate, its corridors wider and better lit than those of Keth vessels. Human crew members nodded respectfully as Blake led Vex toward his personal quarters, though Vex noted the watchful eyes of security personnel tracking their movement. Blake's quarters were Spartan but comfortable, with a view screen displaying the stars outside and a small collection of what appeared to be historical artifacts displayed on one wall. "Please, sit," Blake offered, gesturing to a chair that had clearly been adapted for Keth physiology. "Can I offer you a drink? We've synthesized a beverage similar to your traditional jarka." "Thank you," Vex said, surprised by the consideration. He accepted the drink and found it remarkably close to the fermented beverage favored by Keth officers, with subtle differences that somehow made it more intriguing rather than less palatable. Blake poured himself a glass of amber liquid before taking a seat across from Vex. "I wanted to speak with you privately before we conclude these negotiations, captain to captain, without the diplomats and aides." "I appreciate the gesture," Vex replied cautiously, "though I wonder at its purpose." "Transparency," Blake said simply. "You've conducted yourself with honor throughout these proceedings, despite what must be enormous pressure from your government. I respect that, and I wanted you to understand something about humanity before you return to your people." Vex tilted his head slightly. "I'm listening." Blake took a sip of his drink before continuing. "The technology we demonstrated during our first encounter, the gravitational weapons, the phase-shifted projectiles, the stealth systems, these weren't developed for use against the Keth Empire. No. They were developed because humanity has a long, bloody history of fighting itself. Before we reached the stars, we nearly destroyed our own civilization multiple times. Every weapon system aboard this ship was originally designed for humans to use against other humans." Blake's expression grew somber. "We spent thousands of years perfecting the art of killing each other. When we finally achieved unity and looked to the stars, we brought that knowledge with us, not because we wanted to conquer, but because we knew firsthand how dangerous, intelligent, technologically advanced beings could be." Vex considered this. "Your internal conflicts became your strength." "In a way, yes. But they were also our greatest shame." Blake set his glass down. "The Keth Empire expands because it's in your nature. You evolved as apex predators, and you see the galaxy through that lens. Humanity expanded cautiously because we feared finding others like our worst selves. Yet when we encountered each other, it was you who held the technological advantage," Vex observed. "This time, yes. But technology is not static. The Keth might develop countermeasures to everything we've demonstrated so far. That's why I wanted this agreement. Not because we fear you, but because we recognize a worthy adversary that could, given time, become either a devastating enemy or a valuable ally." Blake leaned forward. "I chose to show you our capabilities not to threaten, but to skip the phase where our species test each other through skirmishes and proxy conflicts, to move directly to mutual recognition and respect." Vex found himself nodding slowly. "A calculated gamble. All diplomacy is," Blake agreed with a slight smile. "But the mathematics of cooperation are compelling. Two advanced civilizations working together can achieve far more than they can by competing, especially in a galaxy with so many unknown variables still to be encountered." The conversation continued for over an hour, ranging from military philosophy to the practical challenges of species cooperation. When they finally returned to the neutral station for the signing ceremony, Vex felt he understood humans, or at least Captain Blake, better than any Keth before him. The preliminary agreement was signed with appropriate ceremony, witnessed by both delegations. It established non-aggression protocols, territorial boundaries, and frameworks for future diplomatic and trade relations. It was, by any measure, a historic document, the first time the Keth Empire had entered into a formal agreement with another species as equals. As they prepared to depart the station, Blake approached Vex one final time. "It's been an honor, Captain Vex," he said, offering the Kaeth salute rather than a human handshake, a gesture of cultural respect that did not go unnoticed by Vex's delegation. "The honor is mutual, Captain Blake," Vex replied, returning the salute. "May our peoples find wisdom in the path we've begun here." "I believe they will," Blake said with conviction, "because they'll look to leaders like us to show the way." As Vex's shuttle departed the station, he watched through the viewport as the ARS Mk7 and its escort vessels prepared to depart as well. Their sleek hulls gleamed in the light of the system's star, beautiful and terrible in their power, yet restrained by the will of those who commanded them. First Officer Drax joined him at the viewport. "So it's done." "The beginning is done," Vex corrected. "The real work lies ahead, convincing both our peoples that this agreement serves their interests better than conflict would." "The High Council has accepted your recommendations," Drax noted. "Their latest communication indicated approval of the preliminary terms. It seems your reports were persuasive." "Reality was persuasive," Vex replied. "Even the most prideful counselor cannot ignore the evidence we presented. The Kaeth Empire has always survived by adapting to new challenges. This is simply another adaptation." As they docked with the balanced discourse and prepared for the journey back to Kaeth space, Vex found himself reflecting on the strange path that had brought him to this moment. A simple patrol, a mysterious distress signal, a trap that had turned into an opportunity, one encounter that had changed everything. The Kaeth Empire would never be the same, and neither would he. The certainties that had guided his career, the assumptions about Kaeth supremacy and the inferiority of other species, had been irreversibly challenged. In their place was something less comfortable but perhaps more valuable, a recognition of complexity, a respect for difference, and an appreciation for the strength that comes from cooperation rather than domination. As the diplomatic vessel engaged its FTL drive and the stars stretched into lines of light around them, Vex knew that both humans and Kaeth now stood at the threshold of a new era. What shape that era would take remained to be written, but for the first time, they would write it together. And it had all begun with that first glimpse of a human warship, and the moment when the Kaeth ship stopped cold.